All right, folks, and we're back. We're talking about all things inflation, and we're joined by Scott Braddock to talk about some of this inflation. I have a first question for you, Scott. While inflation is down, are people actually spending less on the things they buy right now?
So what we're seeing is there is an indication that Americans are spending less money. They're spending less money on what actually drove up some of this inflation, and those are those durable goods, such as cars and houses. And so we can kind of tie that into what's going on right now with interest rates and why there's potentially been a slowdown, which has possibly helped curve this spiral of inflation. Now, with that said, I'm still seeing the parking lots full. I'm seeing a lot of folks out there shopping, and a lot of folks are flying, and those flights are full.
So with inflation rate dropping, is it time for folks to let their guard down?
Absolutely not. Now's a great time to be diligent. We want to make sure that we're continuing to put money aside for the unexpected, usually 6 months of expenditures in a separate account, just to make sure that when the unexpected does occur, we're prepared for this. I recommend that folks meet with a financial professional to help put together a long-term plan so that when we have these short-term financial cycles, we don't get all bent out of shape and make really poor decisions based off the wrong emotions.
So here's a question for you. How do you suggest people save money with prices still high?
Well, right now is a great time to make sure that you have a written budget in place. Now, I know the idea of a budget sometimes doesn't register in a positive way for folks. So if we need to call it a spending plan, that's absolutely fine. But we need to go ahead and list all the expenditures that we have, get a good idea of our cash flow, and then watch how we spend our money. Once we start paying attention, we oftentimes find ways to save more money by cutting out some of those unnecessary expenditures. And over time, that really can help you save a lot of money.
All right, Scott, so we are getting some questions coming in now. I just got this text message. It says, the bill recently passed by the Senate includes a minimum tax for corporations. But if corporations are taxed more, won't they just pass that expense on to their consumers, causing even more inflation? What might prevent that?
Well, potentially that could happen, but what the consumer needs to do is worry about their house and make sure that everything is in order there to make sure that they're protected. And nothing could work better than having a written game plan in place that not only keeps you focused on the long term, but also a budget in place to help you stay focused on those things that you're going to be buying and spending money on each and every day. And as long as we can focus there, we're going to come out okay.
All right, some great information there. We got another question. It says, what does this mean for Social Security recipients next year?
Well, there's some positive news actually in place right now for Social Security recipients. They're talking about increasing the average Social Security monthly payment by about $2,400. Could be a significant increase. We've seen inflation the highest it's been in 40 years. This year, there was a cost of living adjustment on Social Security of 5.9%. They're talking about, possibly 10% for next year. Lawmakers are coming together and trying to figure this out. And there could be a healthy increase to help those folks that are currently receiving Social Security.
All right, great information. Another good question that we just got, it says, the Federal Reserve has now increased interest rates 4 times this year. How is that impacting people?
Well, what we're seeing is a lot of the durable goods spending, such as cars and homes, as those interest rates have gone up, folks are taking a second look at some of these purchases. So folks are not spending as much, and that's really helping. Certainly not taking out loans. And that also affects college loans. You may not think about that, but it does. And so we just are making sure right now that we're not taking on unnecessary debt. In fact, now's a great time to start paying down some of that debt. I love the avalanche method. That's where you orchestrate your debts from highest interest rates to lowest. Start paying that highest interest rate debt off first. You'll start to build some real momentum as you work your way down and pay off those other debts as well.
And what can people do to avoid paying for the increased interest rates?
Well, the biggest thing that they do is they're not taking out more debt. It's really important. It seems simplistic, but that is the key here. We haven't really seen the interest rates increase at the bank on those traditional types of accounts like our checkings or savings and CDs. So really right now, the best thing to do is not to take on new loans that are going to reflect these higher interest rates.
And so right now, information is going around about I bonds. Can you explain what an I bond is for people at home that might not know?
Sure. So I bonds you purchase through the U.S. Treasury. So they're backed by the full faith of the United States government. And so they are considered a safe investment. So a lot of folks, when we see a lot of volatility in the market, they sort of run to these safer options. And these I bonds are unique and they allow your interest to be tied to inflation, which can be great during high inflation periods of time. And these are typically short term, but they are flexible. They're liquid. You may see a 5-year I bond, but you could potentially get out of that early without suffering any fees. So folks do tend to like these types of bonds during inflationary times.
So in the climate that we're in now, Scott, would you recommend people invest in I bonds right now?
Mhm. You know, I have been helping folks prepare for retirement for over 20 years. And one thing that I've realized is that each situation is different. And so when it comes to making these types of decisions, you really want to sit down with a financial professional to take a look at where you're at and then determine what the best options are. Real quick, I look at life in two phases, the accumulation phase and the distribution phase of life. And somewhere in between there, you need a good guide to help you recognize, hey, you're ahead and you need to focus on defense. Defense wins more games, but sometimes you're behind and you need to make sure that you can have a good offense and not lose ground. And so an I bond could potentially be a great place, but you really need to go through a good process with a financial professional to find that out for certain.
All right. So as we wait on some more questions to trickle on in, what are some of the big takeaways that you want our viewers at home to take with them? Things that you want them to keep in mind as we're dealing with this rising inflation?
Well, I would continue to look and see what it is that you could cut back on in order to continue to save. Yes, we need to continue to purchase those items that we need, but we also need to plan for the future and make sure that we're still saving money in our 401ks, we're still saving money in the bank so that we have that money not only for the short term, but when it comes to retirement for long term. And that's very important. We can always take out a loan for other things, but there is no loan out there for retirement. So we do want to, and I want to encourage folks to continue to save for the long term.
And you deal with clients on a daily basis, helping them with their finances. What are some of the questions that they're asking you?
So one of the big questions that we're getting right now is there's a lot going on when it comes to Social Security, for example. A lot of different bills that are being proposed right now. We're looking at round two Secure Act law. So there's just a lot of questions as it pertains to taxation. Taxes right now are the lowest they've been in a really long time. From 1940 to 1983, the highest tax bracket was 70% or more. So we're in a really low tax rate environment. So really just having a long-term written plan that addresses taxation, addresses inflation, not just in the short term, but over the long term. So if you're going to be retired for 30, maybe 40 years, it really makes sense to have something in writing that you can keep focused on.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. I did just get one new question that just rolled in. It says, if you are lucky enough to save while inflation is so high, why don't banks pay higher interest rates on savings?
Sure. Sometimes what happens is it takes a little while for banks and these savings types of institutions to increase their rates. The Fed has increased interest rates 4 times this year. There's still some uncertainty as to how much more interest rates may go up. If we're curving inflation and we're going to avoid that downward spiral of inflation that potentially head to a recession, there's still a lot that needs to be determined before institutions like banks are going to increase their guaranteed interest rates.
All right, thank you so much, Scott, for answering all of our inflation questions. You were very, very helpful, and we'll see you next time.